Hello QL people, Paul here, and this is a short, improvised documentary on my garden and my stuff that could potentially be moved to QL to set up a market garden project. So I'm gonna try and show you around and give you an explanation of things. Now, my field is a great big mess because I more or less abandoned it about 2 months ago, and everything is very overgrown and a big mess. So, but bear with me though, because it does work. So, probably the biggest thing I have in this field with the most value is these things. This is geotextile. All right, it's a woven plastic fabric that we put on top of plant beds to grow stuff in. And the benefit is that it blocks weeds. So you have to do very little weeding. You only have to weed sort of around the whole of the plant. This is the remnants of a kale plant right here. It also keeps the water in the soil, and it helps a lot with heat retention, which means that you can start planting things earlier in the year and you can keep it going later in the year. Underneath, there are irrigation through drip tapes. So see, this is a main line right here connecting to the water source. And then there are several drip tapes leading out from it, each with a little, whoops, that one's broken. Each with a little valve so it can be turned on and off manually. And a drip tape is basically a very cheap plastic tape with tiny little holes spaced about a foot apart, which water your crop. And that is basically the style of gardening I do, is depending heavily on these things, which can be reused year after year. They last many years. And it allows for a much greater degree of productivity, mainly because I have to do a fraction of the weeding that would normally be necessary. But so this row extends out about 200 feet. These geotextiles are 6 feet wide and cut into 50 feet lengths, and yeah, that's it. So I have enough of this to cover roughly an acre, and the holes are pre-cut in them depending on the type of thing that's being produced. So that one is like that, but to give you another example, over here, this one isn't actually well placed, but this one is for lettuce, so it can be used for something that's much more densely spaced. And lettuce is, for educational purposes, kind of an interesting thing to grow because it has to be grown in successive generations to keep up a constant supply. But it's something that even if campers are there like for a week, they can sort of experience every phase of it. You know, the planting, the seeding, the transplanting, the maintenance, and the harvest. Because you want, you grow like multiple successions to keep yourself a constant supply. Further down there, that is insect netting on, I think those were beets that were under there. So a very fine mesh to keep out even the smallest insects. And this stuff is quite expensive, and I've got a fair bit of it. Moving on. Oh, yes. Silage tarp. Basically a plastic tarp that we put on beds where we've harvested something or we want to prepare something, and we just put it on there to kill off all the weeds that are underneath. It takes about 3 weeks, and then you take it off and you've got like bare earth underneath like this, in perfect growing conditions. Also heats up the soil, stimulates microbial activity, stuff like that. So my fields are divided up into 3 sectors depending on the water needs of the plant. So we've got a sector here, there's a sector there, and a sector over here, and they're all linked up to this central irrigation control which is this thing right here, which allows us to set up a timer to water the different zones in different quantities at different times of day. There's a lot you can do with it. And it goes out to these various valves here, 1, 2, and then a third one right there, going out to the different points in the field. And one of these things is pretty expensive. And it's connected up to these main line hoses which go out to the different fields. But so this allows for taking care of the crops. You don't necessarily have to have somebody there every day. You know, the plants will still get watered, and it becomes something that you can potentially do more part-time. So over here is the remnants of a bed of tomatoes, and I've got a ton of these things. These are T-bars, and they're basically just these stakes that I drive into the ground and that we can run tutors through. See, because they got these little holes in them like this, and those can run the whole length of the thing to support plants. So I got a ton of these things, probably like a couple hundred. Then to actually hold the geotextiles down to prevent them from blowing away, we've got these sacks which are filled with gravel. And those I don't know if it would be worthwhile to transport a bunch of sacks of gravel, but we could potentially empty the sacks and just bring the sacks. They're very handy for that, and they cost like $3 a piece, but I've got like 500 of them, so may as well save them. Here, this structure here is what we call a high tunnel. It's kind of similar to a greenhouse, but it's not heated. It's basically a structure that you use to, first of all, to extend your season, right? The things in there are going to be a little hotter than outside, so there's things like tomatoes and stuff that you can start earlier on, and it would allow, say, to start harvesting tomatoes in early July. You know, if they're outside, it's more like August when they start getting harvested, but so for the earliest camper sessions, there would be the possibility of having tomatoes for those. Now, I don't think it's worth it that I would actually transport this thing to Quebec Lodge, and the reason is that it's extremely cheap, and my thinking now is that it would be easier to simply acquire a new one in the Quebec Lodge area than to actually take this down and move it over there. The reason it's cheap is because it's built out of recuperated garage tempos, which I was able to acquire for free simply by going on Kijiji sort of at the end of winter and finding people who are looking to just give away their old tempos with parts missing, or they wanted to build a new one, or whatever. So I was able to get all the metal parts of this for free surprisingly easily. And then the only costs after that were the plastic that goes on top, which is a thick plastic designed specifically for this, and then all the various ropes and things that go with it. And so all in all, I managed to build this thing for like $250. So I don't know, we can see, but I think it'd be better just to build a new one. But this is the kind of structure that I would propose potentially to use at QL. So here's a view of the inside. So the ground is completely covered by another geotextile, which fits this one very well. So as you can see, it's all just garage tempo parts. These little foam things to kind of protect it from the plastic. It's a very thick, durable plastic, and basically ropes going over to hold the thing down. The plastic is not directly attached to the tempo in any way. It's essentially just sort of hugged to the tempo by the ropes, which then are attached to these iron rebar, steel rebar stakes, which are driven into the ground. Yeah, so that's that. But kind of an interesting construction, and oh yeah, and also it just favors tomato production a lot more because the tomatoes like it hot and they like to be protected from the rain. So it's a very productive way to grow tomatoes. Otherwise, there's not a lot else to show. I mean, I've got a few tools, and I'd be certainly willing to give them up. But I mean, the only interesting ones really... So this is a wheel hoe. It's from the 1950s. It's an antique, but it's really useful for tilling on a small surface. This is a broad fork, and it's essential for this kind of gardening, and it's worth like $150, so that'll certainly be saved. There's like various random tools, but nothing super interesting. I mean, there's my electric weed whacker, which is certainly useful. Then there's these two hoes. This is called a stirrup hoe, and that is a precision weeder, which are both kind of expensive. They're both like 75 bucks, so that'll be useful. And then all kinds of little odds and ends which sort of look like junk, but it's all stuff that's needed and taken together comes out to being worth quite a lot, you know, like all sorts of little like metal stakes, but you need a lot of these, right? Yeah, so lots of insect netting, more plastic. Yeah, I've got like still a bunch of plastic left that could be reused. And that's about it for in there. Yeah. So anyway, the big thing is the geotextile. Like I said, there's enough to cover an acre, and it's like several $1,000s worth of this stuff. So it does have a value, and it is an efficient and interesting way to produce vegetables. And I don't know. I think that's about it. Any questions?